Essentially, the Reformation created the modern world. It created new notions of learning, new notions of approaching Scripture, new notions of approaching your vocation, new notions of approaching international politics, new notions of approaching science. A lot of these things had their intellectual roots within the Reformation. Without it, all I can assure you is that this world would look very, very different and think very, very differently without the Reformation.
So when Luther starts teaching at University of Wittenberg, society is very structured, very orderly. The church has its place, which is central, and everything fits around that. As Luther begins to do his careful theological thinking and realizing that the Pope is overreaching, and there are some of his teachings which are not actually accurate, and then as he discovers the reality of the gospel, and everything starts to change, before long, everything starts to get kind of touched by this because the church's reach is everywhere. And when the church's authority is questioned, it makes all of society come into question. And so now this has an impact on politics and an impact on business and even on the family and marriage. Everything starts to look different and people are rethinking everything. Some of the changes are probably welcome and good. Some of the changes probably weren't what Luther had in mind, especially generations down the road. But all this is coming out of the Reformation. This is all part of the impact of Luther's teaching, thinking about theology, and how it starts to affect all of life.
The Reformation had a huge impact on education, which is with us to this day. The idea of compulsory education, universal education for girls as well as boys. The idea of the work of a teacher as a real calling, a calling from God, which we have largely lost in society today, but that was very much there with the Reformation. And the idea of a curriculum that was broad-based, that would teach the liberal arts, that would make people into well-rounded church members and citizens. That all goes back to the Reformation.
European society was already in transition. It was changing. Medieval patterns were breaking down. The Reformation actually is going to accelerate it. And there are certain trends within European society that the Reformation is going to emphasize, this notion of the individual. So Luther's concern was for the individual to establish a relationship with God by grace through faith. So this notion of the individual is going to be a very important element in modern society. The concept that the state being in charge of the church is in some sense a modern concept as well, which we can see beginning in the Reformation. Changing social patterns, the changing structure of the family, many of these are legacies of the Reformation.
What does the Reformation mean today? From a historical perspective, for one, it's kept the Pope out of international politics, and it created a new situation where nation states use more reason of state as a reason for conducting foreign policy rather than notions of Christendom.
The General Reformation, it actually contributed many of the elements of our constitutional democracy, of our republic. It contributed things like the idea that the individual should be free to speak. It contributed the idea that the individual should be free to worship. Although that is not immediate, that is the consequence of the 30 Years' War. It also contributes the idea of representative democracy and contributes the idea of rights, at least for Christians, which then would be extended later to rights for all individuals in the time of the Enlightenment.
One of the really great things about right teaching is that it starts to impact all of life. And that's one of the things I get excited about with theology is it's not just about me and God or what happens when I die or what happens on Sunday morning. Good theology impacts everything. And one of Luther's great gifts that beautifully illustrates this is his teaching on vocation. Luther realized that one of the big mistakes that was being made in the medieval world was this notion that if you really wanted to serve God, if you really wanted to get right with God, you had to forsake the world and go join a monastery monastery or a convent, and if there you could really pursue godly things, and there you could get right with God. And Luther came to realize that not only is this wrong because it teaches works righteousness, trying to earn favor with God, but it's also wrong because it destroys this world. Because it takes a man out of his relationships and responsibilities in this world and drives him into this isolated life in the monastery, where he's of no good to anyone. So Luther said, no, the doctrine of vocation is God's affirmation of this world, God's affirmation of the things we do in this world. So when a man chooses to marry and raise children, this is good and God-pleasing. So this allowed Luther to invest heavily in his own married life. He loved his wife, he loved his children, he loved music, he loved meals with his family, and he learned to delight in those domestic things. In the medieval world, those were always seen as low down, common things. Those weren't holy works. Those were just, you just got to do that. And it's too bad somebody has to do this. But Luther said, no, this is holy, beautiful, godly work. And so he elevated family and married life and children and parenting to a high level which was unheard of in his world. And this, I think, legacy endures to this day. So a Christian can embrace his responsibilities and her responsibilities in this world because it's God-pleasing and it's holy and it's honorable. That's kind of a great gift, I think, that Luther gave us.
Marriage in the Middle Ages had been a sacrament. When Luther married Katie, Katharina von Bora, he was actually making a statement, actually more than one statement by that act. One is priesthood of all believers. What he was saying is that the priests are not a special class that are closer to God than anybody else. He was also establishing a new tradition among Protestants, the Protestant parsonage. So the wife and the family become a very important part of the Reformation process. More broadly, what we're going to see happening is the extension of the authority of the state over areas that in the Middle Ages had been the province of the church. So marriage is one of those examples. Education is another.
As modern American Christianity drifts farther and farther away from Scripture, the Reformation gives us a model. Go back to the Scriptures. Go back to sola scriptura. Focus on the Scriptures. Focus on faith. Focus on the truth that God provides us.
So Lutheranism is an amazingly resilient phenomenon globally. And Lutheranism is now clearly a global movement, which is one of the most exciting parts of Lutheranism. The average Lutheran in the world now looks like an East African, because we see now the church just blossoming, more than blossoming, booming in East Africa, in Ethiopia, in Tanzania, in Madagascar. And so Lutheranism is proving itself to be amazingly resilient globally. So I think part of the resilience of Lutheranism was established by Luther himself. You see, Luther demanded that the Bible be translated into the language of the people. In fact, he once said, God be praised, finally the Bible is in the language of the people. So there's something that is native to Lutheranism around adaptation or the vernacular or cultural contextualization. And I think that's one of the variables that gives Lutheranism this kind of resilience through the 20th century to find it growing again in places like Latin America and Asia and Africa.
Luther starts small and starts innocently, but God has other intentions for this, and his intention is to bring truth back to his church. And that's what the real legacy is. The gospel's being proclaimed again. The promise is there. The clarity of God's truth is there. That's the great heritage, and that, I think, is the responsibility that we who carry the name Lutheran have today. Our charge then is to keep on moving forward, teaching the full counsel of God. All that he says about the gospel, God's free gift, all that he says about this world and how embracing this world is a good and God-pleasing thing and living in this world for the sake of the world, that's what God put us here to do. That's part of our legacy. And when we are able to help the church, the wider church, come to terms with this is a really good thing. And this is part of what it means to be a Lutheran.
The greatest thing about the Reformation are the solas: grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone, Scripture alone. Because in reality, what it does is it establishes the worth of a human being before God in a way that can't be done by people. It's done by God in Jesus Christ. Now, if you really believe that, if that's what you believe the dignity of humanity is, it changes everything about what it means to be human together in society. And so there's going to be tremendous change in society, a lot of it for great good. But it comes back to that unique dignity before God in Jesus Christ alone. What a great way to live together.